So my name's Howard. I am one of the lead robot inspectors in the FMA, or First Mid-Atlantic region. I also do it sometimes internationally when FIRST tells me to do it. So we're going to talk about kind of robot inspection stuff, what is expected of teams, what can you find online, and kind of some of the guidelines that we get instructed at FIRST. So if you didn't know, all the lead robot inspectors from time to time have to go to FIRST headquarters, and in fact many of the lead roles, like the head referee, the field techs, they have to go to FIRST headquarters to get training from FIRST, and that's where we get a lot of the direction that we have a lot of our rules from. And what our real goal is to try to make sure, kind of like McDonald's, wherever you go in McDonald's, the chicken sandwich is still the chicken sandwich. Even if you go internationally, you get a Big Mac, it's the same Big Mac. It may look a little bit different in the packaging, but the size, the shape, the taste, all the same. Coca-Cola, they spend millions of dollars just to purify water, even though it's already purified, just to get that same taste no matter where you go. The only difference is in Mexico they use real sugar, and here in America we use high fructose corn syrup. So we try to maintain from event to event the same kind of standards. However, we also realize that it doesn't happen. So we strive so that in the same event, we try to keep the same rulings. And even here in FMA, we try for the entire district to keep the same rulings. A lot of us inspectors, we talk to one another. So when we see something we don't recognize or that we have questions on, we talk with one another to try to figure out what the ruling should be. So if you don't know, every year FIRST has a game manual, and it tells you how to play the game, what the rules are, kind of what they're looking for, and they kind of tell you exactly what you need to do right there. If it says, your robot cannot be more than 40 inches tall, if you come with 41 inches, you're going to have a bad time. They also have Q&As where teams ask questions like, well, what do you mean by 40 inches? And they'll say, well, 40 inches is from the carpet all the way up. And then people will, well, where's the carpet? And the Q&A will say the carpet is the normal ground where your wheels are. And then they get really, really philosophical really fast sometimes. But in general, people ask a question and FIRST will answer it, and then that becomes part of the ruling. And sometimes teams will also not ask questions and try to purposely have a gray area that they can play in. The last time that really happened was 2017 when we had rope, and we had to inspect all the rope that teams would climb. And the question that FIRST kept answering incorrectly was, if you were to Sharpie your rope, does that count as modifying the rope? It first said yes, and then all the inspectors rebelled and said no. So that does happen from time to time, very rarely. So while we're getting this loaded up, let me tell you a little bit about me. I graduated a long, long time ago with a FIRST scholarship, one of the few reasons why I could go to college. I highly recommend that every student here look into that because it's free money. I love free money. And if you don't want crushing student debt, you do too. So I've been in FIRST for about 12 years. I've been volunteering for about 8. And I've done robot inspection all across FMA, New York City, Detroit, St. Louis, Hawaii, places internationally like China, Taiwan, and Australia. And FIRST really does change your life. And sometimes it overtakes your life, but you gotta maintain some grounding. It's a lot of fun, but you gotta remember to still do your homework. So without kind of using my slides, I'm gonna kind of get into this philosophical idea of, I don't understand why, but FIRST puts out the game manual, they put out the game animation, and for some reason everybody just watches the animation. They never read the rules. And it just confuses me so much that we'll say, your robot can only weigh 120 pounds, and then I'll see a robot that weighs 140. And it just confuses me sometimes how teams miss that. There are a lot of rules. There's over 100 robot rules, and then there's about 35 game-specific rules. So there are a lot of rules to remember, but you're not just one person on one team. You are multiple people on a team. You can share this responsibility. One person can just be for pneumatic rules. One person can just be for game rules. It's not just kind of you're alone. There's a lot of people who will help you. And if you have questions, I do encourage people to reach out, even if they are somewhat obvious, to get the answers that you need, especially in the first 2 weeks where everyone's just trying to understand the basics. So I think we're getting closer. We're getting closer, guys. So some of the other fun things is this year there is no more bag. So you don't have to bag it, tag it, move on. We've evolved from the no bag. So this year there's a little bit of a difference in that you can keep working for almost forever, except there's one caveat. If you are competing at a district or regional or championship, when pits close, you can no longer work on your robot. And now some teams try to get real clever and said, well, can I 3D print overnight? And FRC said no, because that's working on a robot. Sometimes FRC puts rulings I don't always agree with, but that's what the ruling is. Some other fun things that happen now because of no bag is that you can kind of bring almost whatever you want to competition. You can bring in as much spare parts, as much spare material as you would like. But there is a few restrictions on it. You cannot bring 2 robots. And the way they define that is if it, to a reasonably astute observer, which is to like a normal person with some intelligence, that if they see it and it looks like a robot, it's a robot. Now that might mean you bring a drivetrain in, and to a reasonably astute person that kind of looks like a robot, then it's a robot. If you just bring in a shooting arm or a lifting mechanism, it's probably not a robot. It's the act of having a drive base and having electronics and having it wired that to a reasonably astute person it counts as a robot. And now there are some new rulings that FRC has put out in the pre-competition updates that they put out because of the no bag of what is an acceptable form of charitable giving to other teams, like as some call it cheesecaking. Cheesecaking is the idea of taking a mechanism that you know works and giving it to another team, bolting it onto the team, and now they perform a lot better now just because they have that mechanism on it. And FRC has kind of said, no, we don't like that. So they have this word, which I still haven't wrapped my full head around it, called major mechanism. And a major mechanism is something that completes a game challenge. And that could mean this major mechanism helps you pick up a ball or cargo last year. Or this major mechanism could help you climb, like last year. And FRC has kind of said, no, we don't like that, no major mechanism giving. But there is a way to get around that. You can build that thing with them. You can help them put it on. And then it no longer becomes a major mechanism because the team built that. So that's one easy way to try to get around it. So there are some fun words like cheesecake I had just said, and then there's another one that some call pasta. And the idea of pasta is that you have this commercially available part that you give to a team, and because anybody can buy it, it's no longer a modified part, anybody can use it. So a very common one that happened in 2013 was people were giving people Home Depot 5-gallon buckets. And the reason why is the Frisbees that year fit perfectly inside of them. So people would just give the buckets and they would accumulate Frisbees inside the bucket. It worked actually very well that a lot of teams implemented it. They'd cut a hole in it and just use that to shoot out the Frisbees. I think we got some money here. What's up?
With the, you can't bring a second robot, can you bring a second robot but in 40 pieces that's like, partly disassembled? So it doesn't look like a robot, but you just have to bolt it together. And
So that is a great question that I can't answer. There's not enough information for me, at least right now, on the Q&As or direction from FRC to answer that question. But it is a great question, and a lot of people want to know. Because evidently when people say, again, 40 inches, well, what is 40 inches? Is 39.999 okay? Or 40.0005, is that okay? How do you measure that 40? From what point? And that's kind of where it goes. And a lot of the things that I have here are very clear-cut rules, yes, no. And we're going to talk about some of the nuances in a little bit. So let's start from the beginning. This is being prepared for your robot inspection certification at the Comcast Bootcamp. That's my name. So kind of went over some of this. I'm on some advisory boards for FRC headquarters. I run the Brunswick Eruption off-season and a few others. We may have a new one up in North Jersey next year. And I'm a scholarship winner. And I want to be clear, a lot of people think it, but I don't. I do not work for FRC or FMA. So here's some pictures. I ran an off-season at my college. I do a couple of things, and international. So these are the people who have responsibilities in the certification. You have your lead robot inspector, your head referee, field techs, and then some of the people that will call in if we need a clear, more higher level ruling of the senior robot inspector or the chief robot inspector. Now the chief robot inspector, he is appointed by FIRST as the person who helps interpret the rules. Okay, don't want that to happen. But if we ever have an issue and I have a conflict, I can always message them, someone can always message them and try to get a ruling out of them. Oftentimes they'll say, figure it out on your own. So here's some of the responsibilities that the robot inspectors have. Go through the rules and check for compliance. Check for software versions. From year to year, the driver station may get updated, and a lot of it is because of safety sometimes. The one that you get on Kickoff may have some type of safety or security flaw, and they need to update that, and it's very important that we update the driver station if it has that. We're going to do some sanity checks on electrical, make sure we don't have a ground going to the frame, or we didn't reverse the wires, so red and black are very important. Check the size and weight, and plane configurations. You can have different plane configurations, so that might mean in one competition you don't have an arm, and then in the next match you do have an arm. That's okay. There are some rules about it, like the sum of all your configurations cannot be more than 30 additional pounds, but we'll help you figure that out. So interestingly, head referee and field staff actually have some responsibilities as well. They help us check that the overall starting configuration, which usually is, you have to stay inside your robot to start with, is there before the match. They'll consult with us if they have any questions, and they'll also look for some sizing issues. One thing that every head referee always asks me at the beginning of every competition is, note down any team that has the potential to be too tall or too wide. And then I'll give them a list, and they'll have that list with them the entire time of, they cannot climb with this pole up, or they cannot extend with this thing down. And if they see it, they'll just give you the appropriate foul, or they'll warn you. So now there are the team responsibilities. I highly recommend that you have a rule book ready for if you have questions. You can always consult the handy-dandy manual. If you know that there might be some contention on something that you're doing, have the Q&A that tells you that it's legal, or the rule update that says it's legal with you, because then you can show the person, hey, it's right here, it's okay. It's your responsibility actually to show the proof to the inspector, not the other way around. And even if you fail the first time, we'll work with you to help fix the compliance issues. And the one thing that I always tell people, including inspectors, is just because you're right doesn't mean you need to be rude about it. There's a way to tell someone that they're wrong without coming off as an asshole. Have a multimeter, flashlight, and a measuring tape ready. These are just basic things that I think every team should have, of a flashlight, a multimeter, and a measuring tape. If you don't have them, we can find them, but they're very helpful when we're going through inspection, because I don't know how I'm supposed to know what 60 inches is without something to measure that. Now, if you have a conflict with a robot inspector, talk to the lead robot inspector. They'll help you get something. If you have a conflict with the lead robot inspector, approach him and say, hey, I don't think this is right. I think we should talk about it a little bit more. And again, remember what I said, you don't need to be rude about it. So there's some other things. I like to tell people that you should always keep 2 people or 2 students dedicated to keeping up with the updates in the Q&A. During the course of a season, we'll get something of like 600 questions, and about 300 of them are the same question, just repeated. But for about a good 100 questions, they actually make a difference, and they're the ones that you should be aware of. Oftentimes, some people remember the numbers of the Q&As, like I know 626 in 2017 was talking about rope, because everybody loves rope that year. Remember your gracious professionalism, and safety is paramount. If we see something that's not safe, or something that could be dangerous, you're going to need to convince us that it really is safe, or we're going to have to change it. Common sense will always trump the rules. So in 2019, we have this unofficial inspection. Because there's no bag, we no longer have to sign the bag and tag. We can kind of just do it wherever and whenever we want. In general, FMA will communicate to teams if we proceed to do it. I don't think we have anything on the calendar just now, but that doesn't mean you can't print the rules out and do the checklist on your own. The checklist usually comes out about 5 weeks after kickoff, usually the week right before competition. and you can just print it out, go through it yourself, and it's an easy way to make sure that you're ready. And even if you do this unofficial inspection, that doesn't vindicate you from an inspection at the competition itself. You have to redo inspection at every competition you go to. So the unbagging process. There's a lot of words here, but there's 4 words that you really care about. No more bag day. So there's a lot of words here, and I can kind of summarize this with saying, when you're ready for inspection, go to the table, tell them that you're ready, and they'll tell you what to do. They'll tell you to either get in line, or they'll put you on a list and someone will come to you. I encourage teams to, as soon as they're ready, just do it. As soon as you get in, be ready to do it. And then sometimes you may not be ready. You may not have the pneumatics that you want to have on just yet, and that's okay. We can inspect your robot without pneumatics, and we'll note down that your pneumatics are not yet ready. We'll pull the breaker for the pneumatics, and you just play without them. And that's okay. A lot of teams do that. And then maybe 3 matches later, you finally get it ready. It's all fixed. You let us see it. We check it off. You're good to go. And you're good to go. You're done. A lot of teams will fail, and that's okay. That's normal. We'll show you what's wrong, and we'll help you fix it. So previously, the robot weight used to be 120. They just upped it to 125 pounds. Being 0.1 under the limit is a lot better than being 0.1 over the limit. Size limits tend to change from year to year in general. The robot needs to fit through a door, even if the rules say you can't, because if it can't fit through the door, I don't know how it's getting into the competition. Next year's rules will be different, and a lot of what I say might be invalidated by some random thing that FRC decides to do. And that's okay. We'll take it with a grain of salt. A lot of the quotes and things that you're seeing here I took from the 2014 manual, which I thought was one of the easier to read manuals. And just because a component or a part is legal in 1 year doesn't mean it's going to be legal in another year. We have a lot of new motors and motor controllers coming out that I think a lot of people saw about Falcons and Mini Neos and all kinds of fun stuff. So you can kind of figure out on your own if those are right for you, or if you want to stick with Sims and the like. So the inspection checklist, this is kind of just an outline of what we're going to do. We'll do the initial inspection, we'll weigh you, and then we'll go to the pit. We'll do mechanical, electrical, pneumatics if you have it, a power on check, and then for some reason, sometimes the hardest part is getting the signatures. I just don't understand. Like, some people disappear. Like, I need someone to sign. So this is a checklist that you can look at. I took it from 2018. It's 2 pages. We'll get through the first page and I'll flip it over. Like, there's a back? It's kind of like when we're taking an exam. So let's take it a little bit piece by piece. There's a lot of stuff here about bag that just doesn't matter anymore. You can use a bathroom scale for weight. Sometimes people use 2 because their bathroom scale can't handle it, and that's okay. Try to locate a commercial scale. Those tend to be a little bit more accurate. And then you can weigh the robot in parts. So we're going to do a little bit of math and some logic here. If I take a drivetrain and it weighs 40 pounds, and I take another part of our robot and that weighs 40 pounds, and then I take our climber, let's say, and that weighs another 40 pounds, well, now I'm at 120 pounds, and I can't add any more things. But if I know that, hey, this climber weighs 10 pounds and this climber weighs 15 pounds, well, obviously the 10-pound one is a lot better since we're closer to the weight. And a lot of teams will know that their robot weighs, we'll call it 110 pounds, and this part that they want to add is 15 pounds. Well, they got to figure out where they can get 5 pounds out of. So that's a lot of fun things, and why it's a lot easier to fix that at home and not at competition. We'll measure the robot, and we'll also ask you, how does the robot move and translate throughout the field? And what that simply means is, if you extend outwards, how does that extend? If you extend upwards, how does that extend? We want to see that. We want to understand. All right, so no more unbagging. We'll do frame size, volume. We'll do robot weight, extensions. Playing configuration, starting configuration. There's some fun words. It really just means this is how you start the match. And then playing configuration is what you can be in during the match. No sharp edges. If you guys want, I can show you my hands. I have cuts and scratches and scars from robots. I call them battle scars because teams just don't cut zip ties cleanly. They don't deburr metal. And Something that I don't think everyone always understands is you have a zip tie. You want to cut the zip tie. That's cool, great, you want to make it look clean. But the moment you cut the edge of that zip tie, you have a razor sharp edge. And if you move your wrist around it, it's going to cut your wrist or cut your hand. And I have a bunch of them just from zip ties. Those are one of the easiest ways you can cut yourself on the robot, and it just looks so benign because it's not metal, it's not dangerous, it's a zip tie. The moment you cut it, it becomes a sharp edge. Bumper color, numbers, and weight. So I'll often get a question of what color can our bumpers be? It's very simple, red and blue, and make it obviously not purple. The moment you start to become purple, people get confused that if it's red or blue, and we want to prevent confusion. First used to have a guideline of they wanted you to be as close to the red and the blue of the first logo. They've since kind of walked back, but I think it's a good guideline to try to be as obviously red and obviously blue as the first logo. So in the pit, we'll do some more deep, what's up?
Do the numbers have to be a certain color?
The numbers do have to be a certain color. In general, they have to be white or white outlined. And the reason for that is if you're up in the stands and you're looking at a team, you want to be able to know that's team 5, or you want to know that that's team 15. And if you can't see that it's 5 or 15 because the 1 is black, that's not what they want. They also don't want your numbers to be red or blue when the bumper is red or blue because they can't see it. So it's a good question. I get that a lot. So we'll do a more detailed inspection on the bumpers. Sometimes we'll do this failed construction thing of we'll kick it, because if your bumper falls apart when we kick it, it's going to fall apart when a robot runs into it. It's a very simple problem. So we're also going to see how it attaches to the frame. Every year, Andy Mark has these bumper mounting kits and bumper creating kits, and they have instructions on exactly how to put them on the robot, exactly how to build them. And for some reason, like reading the manual, people just don't do it, and then we have problems later. And it's just, they tell you exactly how to do this. I don't understand how people mess it up sometimes. And then we'll also kind of look for more sharp edges, because those are the easiest ways for you to break game pieces and hurt people. So talking a little bit more about bumpers, these are probably the easiest ways that you're going to fail inspection of bumpers. And they're also one of the most important things, because bumpers are really easy to get wrong and really hard to fix at competition. So I highly suggest do it right and make sure they're right before you get to competition. Otherwise, you're running around trying to find wood, trying to find fabric, trying to find noodle, and it can be really hard sometimes. So there's this thing called frame perimeter, and that's that definition you see on the side. This is a loose definition. There's nothing real formal, but if you were to wrap a string around the metal frame of the robot, everywhere that string deflects or it bends is a corner. So you can see a rectangle here has 4 corners. However, that little opening there, that U shape, that is not a bend in. That is not a corner. So there's also this thing that I really want to point out right here where it says not okay on the bottom right. So there always tends to be a definition of the smallest a bumper can be is 6 inches unless that side is less than 6 inches. That is not, that little piece right there, that is not a side. That side is that whole right side of that square. So that entire piece from that corner inwards to the robot has to be covered by 6 inches of a bumper. And I already know if we have U-shaped robots next year, this is going to be a problem I'm going to find with somebody. Hopefully it's not one of you guys. So on the bottom left, you also see a corner. It needs to be protected both sides. It's only protected by one side. Then you see on the top left, this is a good bumper. It's greater or less than that, or I'm sorry, greater or equal to that of 6 inches or more, and it's properly protected. Inside the U, that is not really a bumper. You can have it there, but it's not a bumper. So you really want to make sure that the wood is not longer than it really needs to be. It can be, up to that corner, but it shouldn't be longer than that. If you have a gap inside the robot that's more than, I think it was a ½ inch thick, or I'm sorry, a ¼ inch thick, then you need to have you can't just have a bumper there. It needs to be open. And the reason why is because if a robot runs into that, your bumper is going to cave in, it's going to break. And we're trying to make this rule here to make sure you don't have a problem later. And you may wonder why we picked this arbitrary number of 8 inches, and that's just because that was the arbitrary number they picked. So here's a cross-section view of a bumper. You don't have to have exactly this. These are largely examples. I also highly recommend that you use plywood. It's the easiest thing that you can get in America. There are some provisions for other types of wood if you're in a foreign country like Turkey where plywood is really expensive. But everyone here is from America and everyone here can get plywood pretty easily. So the bumper noodle has to cover the entire corner, like all the way there on the right, not in the middle, because that is not protecting the corner. So here are some pictures of some good bumpers. The bottom left one is one of my favorites, where they're reversible and they can just come down or come up. They have some that you just put a cover over the robot. And this is also what I like to do with when we're prototyping is I'll take the bumper from last year, and that kind of becomes the frame of the robot. And then I'll just like put a rig onto it just to connect to the frame of the bumpers, and then put on our end effector. Like this, that case it was picking up a boulder from 2016, and just seeing how it works and seeing how the robot interacts with the game pieces. What's up?
If you have like a bolt that connects it, are you allowed to have a hole so you can unscrew it
Yes.
from the outside?
So there, you have to have some way of mounting the bumpers to the robot, and one of the easiest ways I find is to use T-nuts, and you hammer them into the wood, and now you have a threaded hole that you can just put right into it. So yes, you can do it, minor clearances. So another thing that we'll have is you'll have your bumper on the side of your robot, and you'll have wheels spinning, and you might have like a hub that spins too. You can actually cut the shape of that hub space out of the bumper, so that when it spins, it's not interfering with the bumper. Clearance holes are okay, but you can't just have like a giant gaping hole for no reason. That's gonna hurt the integrity of the bumper. And you don't want them to break, because then you gotta build them again. So here are some of the most common issues is they won't cover every corner. The pool noodle is not 2.5 nominal inch. For some reason, teams will put in like a noodle that's like gnawed on, and I'm like, how did this happen? Or they'll cut the pool noodle in half, and that is not a pool noodle of 2.5 inch diameter. They won't use a thick enough piece of plywood, and the reason why we use 3/4 inch, which by the way, spoiler alert, if you try to buy a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, sometimes you're gonna get 1/2 inch, because that's the thickness of the blade that cuts it. And that's okay. Some people will use like 1/4 inch thick wood, and when we do our kick test, it breaks. So pro tip, just get 3/4 inch, you won't have a problem. Bumpers outside the bumper zone. So the bumpers can only be between a certain distance, and last year it was between the floor and 8.5 inches. And if you are 10 inches, that is not okay. Other years it's between 2 and 10. And you can kind of play with that. And the idea here is that we give you kind of 2 inches of wiggle that you can have it up or down, and you can kind of play around with that. Bumpers not mounted or supported properly. So you need to have something that fastens the bumper to the robot. That tape is not a fastener. Gravity is not a fastener. A bolt and a nut is a fastener. We had one team in China use rivets. You could do that. The problem that they had, though, is when they wanted to change their bumper, they had to do a system update, apparently. They had to drill out the rivets so that they could, did we, yes, we lost it. They had to drill out the rivet holes so that they could put in new rivets. And over the time of the competition, their bumpers started to sag more and more because the holes got wider and wider and wider. So for the next competition, they fixed that glitch. So mechanical, we're going to look for some basic things. No prohibited items like flamethrowers, reactors, chemicals. And then another funny one is silicon dioxide. You may know silicon dioxide by its straight name of sand. Some teams like putting sand on the robot to help weigh the robot down. You can do that, but you need to make sure that it won't spill onto the field, because then it's a pain to clean up. No risk of damage to other robots. We don't want to see El Toro flipping robots out there. That's a different competition. No risk of damage to the field. If you break the field, we only have one field, and then everyone goes home sad. Frame perimeter must not be articulating. There was this really beautiful robot this past season that as it would climb, it actually broke into 3 different pieces and separated. It was a beautiful design, but unfortunately they didn't read R01 where it says the frame may not be articulating. We worked with them pretty intensively to try to bolt the 3 pieces together so that wouldn't be an issue. And then another favorite one of mine is endgame. You need to have a way without electric power to remove the robot from the field and any game elements. So in 254's case here, all you do is you put your hand in it. In other years, they would have like a wrench that would help unscrew or unthread whatever was keeping the robot up. So cost accounting worksheet or bill of materials. For some reason, every year FIRST has to have like a brainstorm of why we do this and what they want on it. And I don't understand what they do and they don't want on it every year, and I have to reread it because they change it every time. In general, if it's over $500, it can't be used because they don't want to have an unfair advantage to teams that can make it rain. That's about it. The newest addition to this, though, is now software will be included. So if you are buying some type of product online for computer vision that helps solve the game challenge, then that license can't be more than $500. So here's a cost accounting sheet. We have a question?
What if you already had the software installed ahead of time and then found out about this and you started doing it? And you have no
Well, that is a great question because it is still a problem. Because FIRST thinks that the game starts at kickoff, and then all development begins at kickoff. So if you're doing development pre-kickoff, FIRST does not acknowledge that as proper work. They want everything to start when kickoff starts. So to that case, that might be a problem, and I encourage you to ask it on the Q&A. Question from the back.
One of the rules is you can't have your electrical ground connected to the chassis. What's the purpose of that? We're only dealing with 12 volts that has a circuit breaker on it.
So this kind of stems back from a long time ago in 2009 when the field was made of regolith and it was electrostatic generator. And what would happen is as one robot would approach another robot, they would arc and they would turn off both robots. Regolith is something like you'd see in shower floors. If you want, you can Google it or we can talk more on the side about it later. We have another question in the back.
If the software is obtained through like an educational license or some other means that allows it to be free, like I'm thinking specifically of like the JetBrains suite, is that permissible?
That is a great question. I don't know. FIRST just made this announcement like a few days ago, and we're still wrapping our heads around it. And the LRIs have a Slack that we communicate with FIRST directly, and there are tons of questions on this already. So I imagine that FIRST is going to probably clarify their position a little bit more later. But for now, just be aware. This is me guessing, this is not an official ruling, but I would imagine if it's obtained through a free license or it's obtained through First Choice or given to you by FIRST, it would be okay. But again, this is just me guessing. FIRST has at times had some really out there rulings, so we'll see. We'll monitor it. Any other questions before we move on? All right, so the bill of materials lists everything that you use or almost everything. This kind of goes back and forth a lot of what they want, what they don't want. Really what we're looking for is just kind of some basics of what do you have on your robot, how much was it, where'd you get it from. I've had teams write this on a piece of paper or a napkin once. I wasn't really thrilled about it, but I care more that you play than I do you have every T and I dotted and crossed. All right, so some common problems with mechanical. File down the sharp edges. I don't want anyone getting hurt. I don't want to get hurt either, and I just got my tetanus shot. Check your intake, your lift, your climber. Understand how they move. We once had a kid get really seriously hurt because when they moved the lift, their intake also moved with it, and when it came down on his fingers. He got cut pretty bad, but thankfully he's okay and he still has his fingers. Do your homework for the bill of materials. Just have it with you. Like what I tell teams is take the bill of materials and just put it on the robot whenever you go somewhere. And then whenever you need it, it's right there on the robot. Avoid using the same colors as the game piece. So FIRST doesn't want you to distract other teams from vision and targeting systems. So if you wanted your robot to look like an adorable orange piece of cargo like last year, not gonna fly. If you want your robot to look like a hatch panel, or you want a hatch panel design on your robot, I would suggest not doing that. So check underneath the robot for bolt heads. They tend to scrape the floor and rip up the carpet and rip into field elements. And that starts to get the field staff really sad because they have to fix it or they have to clean it, or in worst case, it starts to erode the game pieces. And it's really simple. You take your head, you go all the way down to the ground, you look, you check, and then you're done. I find that sometimes teams will screw down on their belly plan, and they'll have the pointy end of a screw facing the ground, and that'll dig into everything. And I actually saw a team lose because of that, because they were dragging bits of the carpet and field elements that they invalidated their climb because they were touching the ground. So be aware. So here's a general overview of electrical and communication stuff. You can find this out online. This is from 2017. I haven't found a more recent ones, so some of the pieces may be different than what you use, like motors. These are just, again, a general idea. So some electrical things, you can't modify the electrical components other than kind of like soldering them and extending them. What we don't want you to do is take that battery and drill into it. That's a bad idea. We don't want you to take a motor and drill into it. That's a bad idea. So, just solder, don't be crazy. We had an incident in Australia where the battery was sitting in the battery pan, and they wanted to make a new hole in the pan, and they drilled right into the battery, and we had a spill. And you really do need to be careful about this, because in some places like California, you would need to call in the hazmat team, because that is known to the state of California to cause cancer. Lead is no laughing matter. It's pretty bad. Other batteries, if you have a phone that you use for camera tracking, you can use the battery in the phone. That's perfectly fine, because that's inside its computing device. The PDP, or the main circuit breaker, that needs to be easily visible, including the breakers on it. Now, what I don't understand is sometimes teams put it underneath the robot, and I asked them, well, if you had a problem, how do you find it out? It's like, well, we lift it up. Well, can you lift it up for me so I can see it? So then we had 4 people lifting up the robot so I could look underneath it. And I shined my flashlight with one of the other kids, and he walked me through it. And then the year after, they put it on top of the robot. Main breaker. This is probably one of the most important things to be accessible, is if your robot's going crazy, we need a way to turn it off. And sometimes teams have some really clever ways of not following this rule. There's a team from Vietnam that had their main breaker in the middle of their robot underneath a piece of Lexan. And I'd ask them, how do you turn the robot off if it's on? Oh, we don't do that. We just leave it on. When we want to turn the robot off, we take the battery out. So we worked with them to try to fix that. So some more electrical things. We have breakers, snap action that you see on the right. They come in many different flavors. This one is 40 amp. Consult the rules of which one's right for you. The radio. This radio right here is another very important thing. You want to make sure that thing has power. And we have these new things called PoE, or Power over Ethernet injectors, and then you also have the barrel plug. And I highly recommend that you use both, because if your robot is not moving on the field, one of the easiest culprits of why is that thing right there. If that thing loses power, if it drops below 5 volts, you are down for the next 60 seconds, because that's how long it takes for it to boot up. And the reason FIRST knows this, the control system knows this, and what it will do is it'll try to shut off power to everything else. It'll turn off pneumatics, it'll shut power to the motors, it will stop whatever it's doing to try to preserve that 5 volts to the radio, because it knows once that thing goes out, you're gone.
So you should use both?
Yeah, I highly recommend to use both, because you want a redundancy. And you can hook it onto the VRM, and if the PoE somehow breaks, you have the barrel jack. If the barrel jack somehow falls out, you have the PoE. I personally do both, and ever since I've done both, I've never had an issue with this ever since. So some more electrical fun, wire size and wire color. So in general, you need to use copper wire. And I know a lot of you are pretty young, so you don't know this, but we used to use aluminum wire for houses. Aluminum wire does not have the same current carrying capacity of that of copper, and generally needs to be a size higher. So in general, we tell everyone to just use copper. It's a lot easier. You can tell copper because of its copper color. The wire color of the jacket, like red and black, that also is important because you don't want to reverse it. And we try to make things as very, very intuitive as possible. Even on the PDP, which is that main breaker thing that you see in the center, it's red and it's black. You put the red wire into the red thing, the black wire into the black thing. I always do this sanity check, and almost every year I'll find one team that does this incorrectly. I think it's obvious, but sometimes people don't agree with me. You can only put one wire into a port. So right here you see this motor controller and some other things. There's only one wire going in there. If you want two things to plug into it, you need to put one thing and split it to a Y. There's a nice table that you can find every year that tells you what does and what doesn't need to be under what size of a breaker and what size wire. Just find the table. I just control F table and I'll eventually find it. More fun tables. This is the list of acceptable motors and their part numbers. This tends to be more of a problem internationally, where it has to be on this list. If you want something else, not going to work. 775 is actually the name of the ratio. It's like a product line, not a particular product name. So a lot of teams will find 775s. I can tell you exactly where the factory is, when they're making it, when they're shipping it, but they have to go back to America before they get shipped to be considered a part, and sometimes that confuses me. Other things are motor controllers. On the right, it'll tell you what needs to be under a motor controller, of how many, and with what kind. In general, you can have unlimited motors. That could change next year. But you don't know how many you really want until you actually know what the game is. You got a question?
Why might that change?
Because FRC can change that rule next year, and that's what they want. That could be part of the game challenges. They want to try to minimize the number of motors teams are using as like a new difficulty thing. But I've in general seen the number go up, not down. But you are limited with the number of slots on the PDP. There's only so many. You're also limited with the battery because if you have a motor moving everything, eventually you're just going to not be moving because you won't have enough current. What's that?
Can you Y into two motors?
That's a great question. For some of them you can. For these auto drive and window motors you can. Yes, 2 per controller. Otherwise, no for the other ones above. So this is an electrical actuating solenoid. I almost never see these, but they're there if you want to use them. Bring the documentation if you have this, because you will get questions. This will be on the exam. Multimeter, the Fluke multimeters tend to be the ones that I love the most. I am not sponsored by them, although I wish I was. You can use a PCM or the pneumatic control module or the spike fuse that you see on the bottom right there for pneumatics. In general, if you have custom circuits, they have to be they have to have their signal originating from the Rogo Rio, and they have their own rules that go about it. This tends to be like your LEDs. They can have their own branch circuit. Batteries and electrical chargers. This also tends to be a bigger problem internationally. They won't be able to find batteries, or the batteries they find have to be shipped and they have to have an import license to do that. It first tells you a list of product numbers and names that you can just Google and find. My pro tip is if you're going to buy a battery, do not buy it from a secondhand supplier like Andy Mark or Rev or anyone else like that. Buy it directly from the manufacturer. And the reason why is you don't know how long that battery's been sitting in their stock. You don't know if that battery is a good battery or not. If you buy it directly from the manufacturer, they can tell you exactly when they made it and where it came from. I also find that when I buy batteries directly from the manufacturer, they're cheaper and they tend to have better capacity. So I'm not saying that batteries that you get from Andy Mark are bad. I'm just saying my experience with them is that. They have to have a black or red lead, usually that of 6 gauge. That tends to be really thick. A little bit behind because of the delay, so we're going to kind of speed up a little bit now. There's a bunch of words there about battery. You can read it at your own leisure in the manual. I just recited it right here. Best practices, keep all the main stuff like the radio, the PDP, the Rio easily visible. If you keep it easily visible, that helps us on the field tell you if there's a problem. And if we can't see it, we can't help you. Label the wires, so if you know you gotta change something or move something, you don't have to fiddle around and follow the wire the entire way. Have someone else inspect the wiring. People make silly mistakes, it happens, it's okay. Periodically check for shorts. I actually lost a few matches because we didn't know that our motor controller was shorting to our frame, and it was causing us some pretty exotic issues. The moment we put a multimeter to the frame and we saw that, we immediately knew there's a problem. Watch your current limits. The main breaker will snap at 120, so if you're in a pushing battle, at a certain point your main breaker will pop and it'll just turn off. Some more fun stuff. If you see your electronics are acting up, ask for help. That's the beauty of FIRST, is if you have a problem, other people will help you. Just because it's legal 1 year doesn't mean it's legal the next year. Isolate the frame. I think we mentioned that already with a gentleman's question. You can connect up to 2 motors in general, unless they're Sims or Neos or one of the big tool motors. Know what the components are called. If someone says the Neo is smoking, if you know what a Neo is, you can immediately know where the problem is. If someone said the PDP needs to be rewired, well then you know where exactly that needs to be. So now pneumatics, this is a basic pneumatic circuit that you can find in the manual that they use each year. And what I'd like for freshmen is that they can see what the parts are called. So the compressor are those, they have some CFM limits on how much they can flow, and they also have how big or small they are. In general, you can't modify the pneumatic components at all. Compressor power is either from a PCM or a spike switch. And the compressor control, the switch has to be wired into the PCM and Robo-Rio. This is how it knows once it reaches a certain limit to turn off. And you want that because you don't want the battery constantly being drained by the compressor. Because if the current is going there, it's not going elsewhere. We have the relief valve. This just prevents overpressure problems. I had some problems 1 year in New York City where a team just wired the compressor into a cylinder. That's it. So the cylinder just kept charging and charging and charging. And what they really made is what we call a pipe bomb, and we don't want that. These are some of the easiest ways that you can hurt someone as well in an explosive fashion. We have some vent plugs. All you do is you open it and the air comes out. Very simple. Some of them come in line. Some of them come in many different ways. So here are some basic configurations. The one that you see with the off-board robot, last year, FIRST did not allow that. I don't know what next year holds. But in general, maybe that on the left may no longer become legal as we go forward. In general, on the right is what I tended to see. And that's also why FIRST gave you an extra 5 pounds, just so that you can put the compressor on the robot. Tubing, you can use all kinds of tubing. The tubing has to have that kind of inner and outer diameters. That's about it. Pressure relieving regulator. Some people don't know how to do it. All you do is you pull up, spin, push back down, done. You'll hear it click into place. If it doesn't click, I suggest getting a new one. Gauges. There's a lot of gauges out there. The ones that I actually like are the ones from the Automation Direct. They're about the size of my thumb, and the reason why I like them is because they weigh less. The gauges need to be easily visible. If we can't see them, it's going to be a problem. There is a pressure rating that everything has. FIRST has now kind of moved a little bit to a new method of everything needs to be 70 psi or more. And the reason why is because the data sheet that you already has a factor of safety, and FIRST doesn't seem to want to put more factors of safety on top of factors of safety. Factors of safety simply mean that there's a factor, we'll call it 2, so it's if the thing is going to break at 150, if they divide by 2, it's 75, and they'll call that their rating. That's a factor of safety of 2. When NASA sends things up to the space station, everything has a factor of safety of 3 or more. It's a requirement for them. It's on the team to provide documentation. If you don't provide the documents, I can't I can't legally inspect that. I need to see some paperwork. In general, I'll know most of the components, so you won't have that issue. But if you're bringing out something exotic or something that you know might have a question, just print it out and be ready. That's it. What we'll do if we have a problem is I'll have someone take their phone out, look up the part, and we'll find the documentation right there. Some more valve controls. You can read these more in your own time. Some best practices. You need to use a hard brass fitting from the compressor to the blow-off valve. And the reason because is, if your robot comes down and kinks the tube, they don't want all that pressure to be stuck inside the compressor and blow up there. So you need to have a hard brass fitting so that that can't happen. And avoid entangling teams with tubing. I see this happen every year where a tube is hanging out, grabs onto another robot, gets pulled out, the pneumatics disengage and fall right down. Know what gauge is for what. If you're saying that the stored pressure gauge is the working pressure gauge, you can have a problem later. Bring the documentation. Just avoid problems. What you're trying to do is prevent questions and issues. If you do that, you're not going to have a problem. Being over-prepared is better than being under-prepared. Soapy water. So if you have a pneumatic leak, one of the easiest ways to try to find it is to put soapy water on it, and you'll see bubbles form where the air is leaking out. Avoid putting pneumatics in normal places. Don't put a cylinder where robots are going to bash into you, because that's just going to explode. Off-road compressor was not legal last year. They may make it legal again. I don't know. We'll see. We'll find out. And in no configuration should you ever reach that exceeding the maximum pressure. And then the compressor needs to be powered by the robot. So power on checks. We're almost done. We're checking the computer, not just the robot, for Wi-Fi. We're checking Bluetooth, GPS, walkie-talkie. Can't have those. And you may ask, why no Wi-Fi? The computer is not actually the Wi-Fi point. It's actually connected by an Ethernet cable into the field, and the field has its own Wi-Fi point. Pneumatics operation, we're going to charge your pneumatics, see what happens, see how it moves, see the gauges, open, close, be done with it. The orange light, we need to be able to see that orange light. You can have one or two, that's it. Someone asked me if they could have a third because they wanted their nose to light up. I said, no, you can only have one or two. Yeah, some people. Hey, they will blink and sync. They connect to a particular port in the Robo-Rio. That's about it. Power on checks. This is the driver station console. Again, this could change next year. I don't know. There's a bunch of things that we're looking for. We're checking for versions. And sometimes you'll need an update. In general, try to do it yourself. Otherwise, some of us will carry a flash drive with the updates on it. And we'll try to help you guys out. But sometimes this could be very time intensive. So if we're spending time trying to get you updated, it means we're spending more time with you that we could be spending with other people, and that you could be doing something else with your robot, like on the practice field or in a practice match, or repairing your robot for something else. Driver console. It needs to be within those specs, otherwise it's not going to fit on the field. Basic things. I've almost never had a problem with it. However, there was one year in New York City where a team brought a large flat screen TV and just put it on the field station. And the way they would play is they had a camera pole, and they would just play with a heads-up display. They would just play like they're playing a video game. And they wouldn't look through the glass. They would just look at the TV. And I was a bit jealous about it.
Did they get the swallow?
No, that's why this rule exists now. If you have too much weight on the shelf, it will fall. It's not meant to hold a person, it's meant to hold a computer. Robots will slam into the wall. And that's why I get very anxious when I see that, because I don't want to see a team kind of just lose $1,000 because it fell to the floor. This is one of the instances when you can step over the line in autonomous, or sandstorm, I guess, whatever they want to call it now. You can step over the line to help make sure your drive station doesn't fall to the ground. That's an okay thing to do. Best practices. The radio needs to be programmed at every competition. Make it so that the radio is easily detachable. Student can take it, walk over to the kiosk and get configured. The faster you do that, the faster you can get into a practice match. Check for updates before the competition. In general, we try to blast all the teams that there's an update that you need, but evidently we can blast all the teams, but it tends to not get to everybody. Ethernet latch on some driver stations. As we go through this, the Ethernet's plugging in, plugging out, plugging in, plugging out. You'll do it about 500 times, a season. And every so often, the port on it will start to degrade, and it will no longer latch the Ethernet in. So what a lot of teams do is they buy a USB Ethernet adapter, and they just plug into that. And that way, they don't have to replace the computer, they can just replace the adapter. And that's a really important thing, because if the Ethernet pops out, you no longer control the robot. Avoid USB hubs where you can. USB hubs just add in one more single point of failure. I tend to see this a lot with controllers. They'll plug everything into a USB USB hub, even though they have enough ports on their computer, and the USB hub will go bad, and they will stop moving. So this is the final thing, and sometimes the hardest, is to sign at the dotted line. Sometimes I don't understand. They gotta go to the bathroom. They have a phone call. They're never here for it, and we need you to sign. That's all we need, and then you're done. We'll give you a sticker. We'll mark it off as good, and we move on. A couple of things I want to mention here is that a lot of the words we use, I tried to put in caps, in all caps, because the manual, if a word's in all caps, it means it's a defined word in the glossary, and it's different than the others. These are a bunch of words you can read on your own. COTS, strategies, being 1 or 2 inches less, or 1 pound less, a lot better than being more. Please read the rules, it makes everyone's life easier. Allowance and spare part assemblies, this is kind of like what we were talking about before. There is no such thing as backday now. Major mechanism, this is the definition. This is all I have to go on right now. This is still a source of fierce debate with some people, and we'll see how it ends up. We'll see how this season goes. If people have questions about it, you can talk to me afterwards. And that's it. Please read the manual. And then one final thing, even though I know you want to clap. This is the list of your lead robot inspectors in the FMA district. If you have a question or you want to contact them directly, let me know. Or talk to me if you're going to Montgomery. And this is free and friendly. You can message them. You think you have a problem? Just go and message them, and they'll be like, well, maybe okay, or we'll try to help you find the answer. All right, thank you guys.